Welcome to session 2 of our 2025 NOVA conference. This session continues our discussion on connectivity and transformation to explore tangible ways we can create new pathways towards more relational futures. As always, we invite you to put your cameras on to promote that sense of community. My name is Susan Prescott. I'm Director of the NOVA Centre for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing and Professor of Planetary Health at the University of Western Australia. And it's my pleasure to be chairing the conference. We like to open with something creative, and as we think about the future, it's also important that we turn to the next generation. So we're deeply grateful to be able to share the beautiful artwork of the young student artists who participated in the 2025 art program at Bowseat Creative Action for Conservation. This is a Boston-based not-for-profit which has engaged over 44,000 school children worldwide using art to advocate for our environmental awareness. And we've collaborated with Bowseat for a number of years now. And enormous thanks to Linda Cabot and her team for facilitating that. So we've created a 2-minute video of their beautiful images set to music, and I will also post a link in the chat to where the students also share their reflection and their hopes for the world in an accompanying narrative if you'd like to learn more about their thoughts. So please enjoy that. Well, a huge thanks again to the young artists and to Linda Cabot at Bowseat for this continuing collaboration. I would now like to invite Rick Scott to guide us through a mindful moment to bring us all into a conscious connection as we begin our panel. Thank you.
So for the next 2 minutes, I invite everyone to turn on your video in gallery mode so that you can see as many of us as possible on your screen. We're going to have a shared moment of connection through movement. So I'd like to start by just everyone with your right hand, just a nice gentle welcome and a wave to everyone else on the screen, feeling that heart-centered connection. And now move to your left hand. Nice gentle wave back and forth, looking at everyone, many people as you can see. And now we're going to combine the movement with both hands. Nice, gentle movement, lots of activity. And now we're going to move to something a little bit sillier, some silly movement. You can contort your face, move your arms around your hands. And now when I say freeze, I want everyone to freeze wherever you are, as silly as you can be. Ready? Freeze! That's a great group shot. Okay, and now relax. Just sort of shake it out a little bit and be present in this moment. And now place your hands on your heart and look around the room at all of our friends, our colleagues, those people who are with us here, as well as those who join us later via video, and just a warm, heartfelt welcome to all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. It really confused Zoom with all the hands going up, I think. It's really important that we start our meetings, and in fact we should have more mindful and silly moments in lives. I think it would be quite transformative. So this session will follow our usual format with a series of short talks by our panellists, followed by an opportunity for discussion, which will be open to everybody. I will open the panel with my 5-minute introduction to set the scene and introduce our first speaker. So we'll go straight to that now. Thank you. Having explored what it means to restore connections in our earlier discussions, we now turn to the bigger question of where deeper relationality might take us. This session looks beyond repair to imagination and nurturing the emergence of new ways of organising life, guided by relationship, coherence and care. It invites us to consider how connected consciousness can be developed and translated into connected systems, how networks of people, ideas and practice can align to shape futures grounded in reciprocity and shared purpose. As a more relational future emerges, every genuine advance, scientific, social or spiritual, can gain greater potential through conscious connections centred in mutualism. These connections not only sustain us but can also transform us, creating new possibilities through expanded perspective and deeper awareness. Across sectors and cultures, many communities are now acting with the awareness that the power for change lies not only in scale but in synergy, in spaces where diverse disciplines and worldviews meet and interact creatively. These communities of change are already forming the connective tissue of new planetary movements. Many of today's speakers across both sessions embody this shift, from quantum social change, education and system science to regenerative movements, ceremonial practice, music, visual arts and philanthropy. Their work demonstrates how inner development and collective intelligence converge in practice. They remind us that the future is being shaped not only by technologies or policies, but by relationships, circles of collaboration that cross boundaries of nation, culture and belief. To move towards relational futures, we must cultivate both structure and spirit. Networks of transformation thrive on diversity, but depend on coherence, mutual respect and love. Systems science offers one language for this, a language of feedback loops, emergence and adaptive resilience. Wisdom traditions offer another, a language of interbeing, reciprocity and balance. When these languages are woven together, they illuminate practical pathways for regenerative systems, economic models rooted in care, governance that empowers participation, and education that awakens empathy and imagination. As with everything, relational futures are sustained by the inner work of self-awareness and developing the capacities that we each hold. This can be guided by an understanding that the ultimate source of collective flourishing is when each individual can find spiritual fulfillment, purpose, and meaning. It points to the kind of individualism rooted in unitive awareness, that we are all ultimately connected and each have a unique part to play, rather than one driven by ego or the need to compete. Through developing our conscious connection with others, new possibilities can manifest for both personal growth and collective benefit. We are now seeing many groups adopting this inner-led paradigm to promote cultural renewal and transcend the polarizing narratives that destroy relationships and sow confusion, division, and hatred. Rather than fueling these dynamics, we need to make a different choice, to shift our understanding towards renewal that seeks alignment rather than reactivity and holds paradox as a creative tension rather than a division to be solved. This capacity to lead through coherence, humility, and deep listening is the heart of adaptive, compassionate leadership, a form of leadership in which everyone has a role to play. Ultimately, this session invites us to envision relational futures as more than ideals and to recognize them emerging in the practices of connection we enact each day. Our choices and relationships can bring these futures into being now. When we eat in reciprocity with the land, when giving is guided by love rather than transaction, and when sustainability includes nourishing spirit, we will begin to embody the very futures that we imagine. With these attitudes and actions, each choice becomes an act of renewal, reinforcing the foundations of a flourishing civilization. Realizing these relational futures will depend on the networks we build and the relationships we nurture. Many of us are part of communities already working, often at the margins, to reorient society towards connection, consciousness, and care. There is huge potential in bringing these efforts together, linking spiritually grounded and science-informed networks to amplify collective impact. This is the aim of the Nova Centre for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing, and we will also hear from other groups advancing this vision. As Nobel Prize-winning complexity scientist Ilya Prigozhin reminds us, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system. By connecting our efforts, we can magnify that coherence. This session calls us to participate in that emergence, to become the living networks through which relational futures take form, guiding us towards a more compassionate and coherent world. It is now my great pleasure to welcome our wonderful panelists, and I encourage you to explore their bios in the chat link to maximise their time. Each will speak for around 7 or 8 minutes, and I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker, Rufus Pollock, an inspiring entrepreneur, activist and thought leader who translates visionary ideas of social and cultural transformation into practical action through community. His work helps us imagine wiser ways of living together, grounded in love, abundance and wisdom. Welcome, Rufus. It's really wonderful to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with everyone. So I'm going to share today about, I guess, a way of making sense of what is happening in the world today and how that would be a basis for action. I'm just going to start by just saying a little bit, life itself, you can read more about. I'm not going to introduce a lot, but it's a collective that's been in existence for 10 years, and we're committed to practical action for a radically wiser, weller world, or we could say now a second renaissance. And the second renaissance is a name that we're using partly because we think it's accessible, at least in the West. There's an immediate historical resonance, but the basic sense is that our current civilization is crumbling, leading to a period of crisis and potential rebirth, what we could call, as I said, a second renaissance. And there are many terms that you might have heard of, like the Great Turning from Joanna Macy, or metamodern, or integral, or liminal web, or regenerative, or more. And Second Renaissance as an initiative is like this vision and an introduction to this time between worlds and a home for a growing set of people who are working to make it happen in a rigorous, practical, and yet utopian, I guess, pragmatic utopian way. I'm also going to say, I'm not going to talk about it now, but this work here is not in some way original, that I'm presenting at least the ideas. It goes back many ways and with many ancestors. And particularly for me, there's things like integral and Buddhism and many other lineages that have influenced us. What I want to give here, and echoes as people who know their Buddhism, the core teaching of the Buddha in his first Dharma talk in the Grove was in Deer Park, was the Four Noble Truths. And he used, I think, a metaphor that is very common. I mean, he used it because this idea from health of like illness, diagnosis, prognosis, like, can you get better? And then what the path of that is, was something that's immediately understandable. And so when we look at our civilizational situation today, we want to ask ourselves, what is their illness? Are there symptoms? If so, what is the source of those symptoms? Because if we misdiagnose, if I go in with a headache and the doctor says, it's just a migraine, take some ibuprofen, and it turns out I have brain cancer, I'm going to die. So when we misdiagnose what's going on, we spend our effort in somewhere that's very mistaken. And so it's quite important that we diagnose correctly, and then we identify our treatment in a useful way. Now, of course, in these things, it's not as clear cut as medicine when we look at our civilization, but I think we can be more or less accurate. And so we're going to offer this kind of Four Noble Beliefs. I'll start with the first one. I'm going to go quite quickly here because I think this is obvious that there are signs of serious illness. Kind of people who have come to a call like this, I think it's kind of clear probably that our world shows these signs. Escalating series of issues, of crises that are interconnected, ecological, political, and social. And, there's the ecological crisis. There's also existential risk from technology. In the last, 70 years of human existence, we have for the first time had the capacity to destroy ourselves as a species. And I want to focus, though, on the diagnosis. So our thesis here is that these symptoms have a common source in the roots of our civilization, in our cultural foundations. So the first point is that foundational to our civilization are these shared views and values. And what we are suggesting is this breakdown is at the roots of our civilization. It's why we've been so unsuccessful, for example, at addressing the ecological crisis. We're operating at the level of, systems or different economic way of doing things or things like that, or new technology, while the issue is ultimately deep in the foundations. And in the foundation of the civilization are kind of core ideological beliefs that are often unseen just because we live by them. And some of these things have been very positive in the West and now across the world, because modernity has come to dominate in most countries in the world for good or ill. Things like individualism, progress, rationality, freedom, and equality have these immense benefits in many ways, but they now cast these long shadows. And things like endless growth, materialism, techno-solutionism, addiction to certainty and control, like one of the most subtle. We believe in certainty. We believe we can control things. And they're driving global exploitation, the destruction of nature, nihilism, a meaning crisis, loneliness, and an ever-widening wisdom gap. Now, what that suggests, if that is really the source of our crisis, we have to operate at that level. And the good news, though, to conclude there, we are in a meta crisis. That's what we would say is a meta crisis. It is a crisis of the meta layer, at these foundational layers of our civilization. And though the good news is that cures exist. The reason we even use the term Renaissance, just for historical analogy, is the last time we had a paradigmatic shift of the level that we are interested in was in the Renaissance, and then through the Enlightenment, the birth of modernity. Whatever we now think of modernity, that was the last shift on the scale, at least, that we're talking about. From a world in which, if you went back 1,000 years in either ancient Japan or ancient China or ancient France or Western Europe, authority came from something like God or the emperor, and political power was with the king. You were in a hierarchical system. And we moved into a system in which authority came from reason and science, like knowledge and, truth came from there, and authority came from the people in some way, whether it's communist people or it's democratic people. That was modernity. That is the scale of the change we're talking about. And so cultural paradigms can and do evolve. They have done in human history before. The views and values and the deep stories that shape civilization have changed and continue to change, and new paradigms emerge. And human beings can and do evolve. The one thing I want to say here is that we also have to be honest about the darkness before dawn. The Renaissance happened after the 14th century, in which about half to a third of the European population died. There was a dark age before the rebirth. And crisis is one of the things that inspires transformation, whether it's personally or collectively. And so a new regenerative paradigm is needed. I think many people on the call share this view. And it is coming, I think. Something is emerging. Whether it's inner growth over outer growth, whether it's wisdom, whether it's interbeing, the resurgence of spirituality and religion, or going beyond capitalism. So to end, this is the Four Nodes release. We are witnessing an escalating series of collective crises. There is suffering. There is a source at the root of our paradigm, and well-being is possible. We can get better, and there is a path. Thank you very much.
Well, many, many thanks to you, Rufus. And we've put some links in the chat to your work if people want to follow up for more. We not only need to start imagining new ways of living in the world, we also need to start putting it into action. And the work that you're doing is giving texture to that. Thank you very much. The more we all start to participate in change in whatever way feels right for us, the more cross-sectoral momentum we can build for wiser society. And that provides the perfect introduction to our next speaker, Karen O'Brien, whose work on quantum social change is paradigm shifting, and I'm sure many here are already familiar with it. This encourages us to move beyond linear thinking to fractal approaches, to scaling transformative change and understanding the powerful ways in which our individual actions matter more than we think, in creating a quantum field of change. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, and thanks. Hello, everybody from Oslo, Norway, and it's a pleasure to be here at this very inspiring conference. And I'm going to just briefly share my slides, and yeah, as Susan said, I'm very interested in how do we scale transformations to a just and sustainable world. And I come at this as a climate change researcher, looking at the human and social dimensions of global environmental change. And I'm interested in how do we transform at the rate, the scale, the speed, and the depth that is called for by the polycrisis and the meta-crisis that Rufus just talked about. And I'm interested in what is that relationship between individual change, collective change, and systems change. So when I think about quantum social change, I think of it as a conscious, nonlinear, and non-local approach to social change and systems change that is grounded in our inherent oneness. And at the same time, it recognizes the importance of both diversity and difference in the process of transformative change. So, for me, going to the paradigms, I think that we all agree that an equitable and sustainable world really depends on our capacity to transcend that individualistic, deterministic, atomistic, and reductionist paradigm that Rufus just explained that influences our current understanding of social change. And so science itself is inviting us to be open to the possibility that we're all part of one entangled system and that we live in a world of potentiality. So my passion project over the last 15 years or so has been, how can the metaphors, methods, and meanings from quantum physics and quantum social science inspire transformations that are not just rapid and effective, but equitable, ethical, and sustainable. And this brings us then to the point of this whole conference is that relationships matter. And for many people, relationships to concepts such as self, other, and nature have been very much influenced by that Enlightenment paradigm and the classical assumptions of materialism. Quantum systems, in contrast to the classical view, are characterized by entanglement, by uncertainty, by indeterminism, and by potentiality. So in a classical system, we can think of parts as being interacting and interrelated, but in a quantum system, we can think of it as a whole of intra-acting, intra-relationships, where intra is within or inside of a whole. And so from this perspective of intra-acting, we are the systems that we are transforming. And when we consciously transform our relationships to the system, then the system itself changes. So that gives us a lot more power than we think to transform systems. But it also recognizes that if we want to consciously transform society in an equitable and sustainable manner, we have to recognize that consciousness matters. And in these classical materialist approaches, humans really downplay the significance of consciousness, free will, and responsibility, or the ability to respond. And ironically, the science itself doesn't really take into account the noosphere, that shared sphere, the sphere of shared consciousness and mental activity that really brings us together in this transpersonal and connective, collective way. And I think that helps us then, or that leads us to underestimating our individual and our collective capacity for social change. And that brings us then to agency. And agency matters because transformations will not just happen by wishful thinking, and they won't happen just by hope. They call for actions and interventions to deliberately shift outdated systems and structures by generating new ones that are more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And when we talk about agency, we have to recognize that agency has been responsible for many of the problems in the world. So it's not just agency, but it's the quality of agency that matters. And so it's really what is it? What values are we embodying, and do those values apply to the whole? So here we're looking at kind of what universal values, intrinsic values like equity, compassion, dignity, justice, things that really are in this acausal space of oneness that we can describe. And so if we can think of ourselves as agents of change that are working with nature, as nature, and for nature, then we have to recognize also that fractals matter. And fractals are these self-similar patterns that repeat across scales. And we can see them in nature, we can create them through mathematics, but we can also consciously generate fractal patterns in our social world. And in our social world, fractal patterns they're not value neutral. They actually have the qualities and the values that replicate at all scales. So when I think of fractal change, I'm thinking of quantum fractals that are non-local, entangled, and that they influence the whole. So how can we be those fractals of change? And this brings us to you and why you matter more than you think. Because it's not just in terms of mattering in terms of significance, but also in terms of substance, in terms of collapsing a wave of potential coherently into a reality that we desire. So agency is an entangled, interacting phenomena, and the outcomes of our intentions and actions affect us all, even if we're not aware of it. So we have this capacity to consciously interact based on values that apply to everyone. And this means that mind, meaning, and matter are not just interconnected, but intraconnected. And the potential for quantum social change isn't in the technologies, but it's in people. And it's expressed for love, for ourselves, for nature, for the planet, and for future generations. And I'm very interested then in going from this kind of theory of, how do we go from people as being the solutions to putting it into practice and experience. And I do this through what I refer to as the three spheres of transformation, the practical, the political, and the personal, where we can enter this space through these universal values, and we can start to see how do I connect who I am with what needs to shift in society, with what results we want to see in the world. So this kind of fractal agency where what I do actually, it goes beyond top down, bottom up, and local and global, but actually influences the whole. So how can I actually work in this in my context, and you work in your context, in your sector, in your area of expertise, or whatever, and that we start to create these patterns or this field that starts to move us in the direction of that equitable and sustainable world. And I think this is where we start to see that it's what we're doing, what I'm doing in Oslo, and what you're doing in wherever you are, is actually part of a much larger movement that's taking place right now. And to me, that's really exciting, because it's a little bit like that, these fractals of change are happening everywhere. They look differently, they're unique, but they're also aligned toward the same direction. And when we start to recognize that individual change and that we influence our family and our friends and our networks and our communities and our cities, our regions, continents, etc., we start to see those, how we're all influencing each other all the time. And so in the returning to the power of connections, which we started with, in an entangled world, we're always interacting with the world. And we might feel that our fingerprint is very small and that we're not like, we don't really matter, but we are mattering in every moment. And we have to look at quantum social change not as this abstract thing, but it's a process, it's a practice. And if we change the way that we think about and engage with social change, I think that we really truly can generate and experience a quantum leap to sustainability. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. It's a really exciting way of seeing the world in a much more empowering way, that if change somewhere can lead to change everywhere. And I did put a link to Karen's Substack a newsletter in the chat, so you can follow what she has to say there. So this brings us beautifully to our next speaker, and I'm delighted to welcome Bruce Goldstein, one of the co-founders of the Transformation community, which focuses on social and ecological change. His work at the University of Boulder also bridges academic inquiry with co-creating real-world transformation through communities and networks, and gives emphasis again to linking the inner and the outer so-called dimensions of change. It's really wonderful to have you with us, Bruce. Welcome.
Great. Thanks, Susan. And thank you so much for inviting me into this gathering. So Lachlan's going to do the slides. So it's a joy to be here with people whose work I really feel deeply connected to. So as Susan said, I steward the Transformations community, which began when Karen O'Brien hosted the first Transformations conference in Oslo in 2013. So since then, through biannual gatherings across the world, we've grown into a professional community of people practicing sustainability transformations. We're expressing that fractal agency that Karen just talked about. So we're action researchers and reflective practitioners working inside complex systems. So we're focusing on transformations as something we catalyze, not just something we study. So let's see, next slide, please. Over the last few years, the Transformations community, we've been going through our own evolution. So at our most recent conferences in York and Johannesburg, Ioan Fazey, who's coming up, was leading the York conference. You could feel it, not just in the research and case studies, but in the arts, the theater, the movement sessions, the circles on well-being and emotional presence. Tried to capture that, the few pictures here. We leaned into the way that sustainability transformations aren't only technical or analytical, but they're relational, embodied, creative, and personal. Don't have to convince this group, right? So over the past 3 years, to understand how our community was changing and how we could serve it better, we turned inwards and reflected. So through dozens of interviews and through in-person sessions that included several of the speakers here today, we began to hear similar patterns, similar messages. People weren't just describing hard work, complex systems. They were talking about what Rufus was talking about. There's a shift in the ground of practice itself. Ecological baselines are moving faster than planning cycles. Institutions that once held our work are drifting and fragmenting. Political landscapes are volatile. We know this world we live in is changing. It's qualitatively different. New technologies like AI are reshaping what counts as judgment or expertise. And practitioners are carrying emotional and ethical weight that wasn't even part of the landscape when some of us might have begun our careers. So these stories we're hearing, they're not isolated. They formed a signal for us that transformation is now being practiced on unsteady ground. And across these reflections, one insight kept rising to the surface, that people are no longer practicing transformations in response to a rupture. They're practicing transformations inside of it. Inside this rupture, practitioners said they're drawing on forms of judgment, relational presence, meaning making that don't come from a conventional sustainability transitions toolkit. So these tools that I was trained in as a planning scholar were built for a world where you could map stakeholders, you could define pathways, align incentives, design interventions with some degree of predictability. But under conditions of rupture, the work becomes less about applying methods and more about how one orients, relates, anchors, and improvises. That's what we kept hearing. These inherited structures and processes we have no longer guide the way. But people weren't discouraged by this. It actually clarified and I think enlivened them. There's a shared question here. If this is the landscape we're in, what kinds of practice does it call forth and how can the community support it? So over the last few months, what's kind of become present for us is that we want to create a place to explore these new and evolving practices together, which we call the Agora Initiative. So next slide, please. So the Agora, we have this sort of farmer's market vision, all these different kiosks or booths coming together and working together and having kind of emergent properties. It's not a program. It's not a sort of a network. It's a field lab. It's launching in the new year. So small practitioner-led groups are going to explore this reality of transformation under rupture. So instead of trying to fix it or escape it, the question becomes, what becomes possible when we experience practice directly inside of it, inside the rupture? So this is going to take shape through a constellation of small groups, each one working in a frontier where rupture is already shaping the work. So we have 5 initial groups. One focuses on ecological collapse, the other on institutional drift, another on AI and the reshaping of trust and knowledge, new knowledge practice, another on ethical and relational tensions within transdisciplinary practice, and one that is dear to this group on inner spiritual and ecocentric dimensions of staying oriented and enlivening and being enlivened in a time of strain. So each one of these groups is going to explore a different expression of rupture. And together, they'll give us a fuller picture of how transformation is unfolding now. Complex, pressured, relational, improvisational. So to help these inquiries come alive, we're bringing resources and people to the table to assist in communications and operations. We want to give the Agora structure to function, not to manage or direct the work, but to amplify it, to make the narratives visible in a variety of different formats, to help patterns connect and surface, and to keep simple rhythms that connect the work without weighing it down. So we all don't need another, network infrastructure that we need to learn. So last slide, please. So in many ways, this Agora is the natural next step in the transformations community's journey. It's being shaped by many of the people who are presenting in this session. So it's a way of saying the world has changed, and so has transformations practice. And we need a place to explore that reality with creativity and companionship, safe and brave spaces. So at its heart, this isn't about, new project deliverables. It's about cultivating a shared capacity to stay grounded and imaginative in a time of structure and draw on our full humanity, which is what we're all about here: cognitive, emotional, ethical, embodied, relational. So we're formally launching this, and we have a simple hope that it can become a place where people can inquire together into what the world really needs right now, or our work anyway, across these different contexts, connected by a shared commitment. So if we can do that well, if we can create a place where these threads weave together, then the transformation efforts around the world that we support and we amplify don't need to align. We're looking for ways for them to resonate together. So this can help us not only change systems, but stay whole while we do it. So last little slide. If this resonates with you, if you want to stay involved or stay informed or just hear what's this like, please sign up for our newsletter. Everyone who runs a nonprofit's got to say that, right? But it is the simplest way for us to stay in conversation, and we don't spam people. So I'll put it in chat, and I'd love for you to join us on this journey. So thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce, and congratulations on this new initiative. It's so important to look through these different lenses to create and connect communities of change. And we're looking forward to finding ways of working with you and others here to build complementary efforts for this. And our next speaker, Hannah Gosnell, is very much part of these networks of change. And I'm sure many of you here remember Hannah from her previous contributions. And we're thrilled to announce that she's recently joined the Nova Institute as one of our new scholars. And I'll invite Hannah to tell you more about her plans and connecting ideas and communities, and especially the work that she's been doing with the Transformative Change Assessment for the IPBES, which stands for Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Thank you, Hannah.
Okay, hey everybody, thank you so much. And thanks, Susan, for organizing this incredibly beautiful gathering. It's just wonderful to be here with all these heroes of mine and heroines of mine. And just so great to be part of the NOVA community, who I've really experienced as a group of kindred spirits that are really exploring different ways of showing up to address these different social and environmental crises that we're all variously interested in. But it's just been an amazing community to be part of, and I'm honored to be here. I'm going to share a little bit about what we learned from the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment. So I had the incredible honor and privilege to be part of this big scientific assessment of transformative change over the last 3 years that was sponsored by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It's kind of like IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but focused on biodiversity. And it was really exciting to see the openness to considerations of the inner dimensions of transformative change. A lot of the things we've been talking about today, not all of them, but a lot of the things we've been talking about today were welcomed into the space. Some of them were very controversial to include into a big science policy assessment, but it was just exciting to see the growing interest and acceptance in the science community of some of these concepts. So I feel like it's relatively new. Mainstream science policy bodies like the IPCC and former IPBES reports, they sort of avoid talking about transformation, let alone spirituality or consciousness. And so this assessment not only names disconnection and domination as root causes of ecological harm, but it also makes space for inner transformation, indigenous worldviews, and plural ways of knowing as legitimate parts of the path forward. So my role today isn't to offer anything radically new, but to reflect how even the most formal and evidence-based institutions are beginning to recognize that without reconnection and without relational repair, there really is no transformation. So I'll give a very quick overview of the assessment and then highlight a few of the findings that I think will resonate most deeply with this group. So a lot of people have called the assessment groundbreaking because of its focus on underlying causes of biodiversity loss. Past reports focused on the direct and indirect drivers, but this was seen as novel for wanting to go a little bit deeper. And the full title, as you can see here, is The Underlying Causes of Biodiversity Loss and the Determinants of Transformative Change and Options for Achieving the 2050 Vision for Biodiversity. The 2050 vision refers to a core goal in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework where humans and nature live in harmony by 2050. So it was very inspiring and a big responsibility to kind of figure out what the strategies are to have humans and nature living in harmony by 2050. But we did our best. We had over 100 experts from over 42 countries, a good proportion of social and interdisciplinary scientists. We collectively looked at over 7,000 references. We assessed 800 or so visions of a transformative social and environmentally just future. We looked at different case studies, and we had to address over 10,000 comments over the 3 years from all the governments from around the world. So it's quite an impressive assessment. I hope you all can take a look at it. It's a great, if nothing else, it's a huge lit review of what the current state of knowledge is on these topics. So I won't have time to go through the whole thing, obviously, but just for future reference, Chapter 1 includes definitions of transformative change and why it's needed. Chapter 2 is about transformative visions for people in nature and the need for engaging people, envisioning and activating imagination. They highlight this imagination gap that we need to address. Chapter 3 is about theories of transformative change. Great overview of all the different theories out there. Great lit review on that. Chapter 4 is about systemic barriers to transformative change, including the persistent relations of domination. And then Chapter 5, which I worked on with Bruce Goldstein, and by the way, Karen O'Brien was one of our 3 fearless leaders of this whole assessment, which made it especially fun to work on. So Chapter 5 is about strategies for transformative change that include governance and interdimensions and so on. But I just want to say that framework in Chapter 1 I found to be really useful. It was developed under the leadership of, in part, of Fern Wixon, who I think is here today. She really helped develop the definitions and identifying the underlying causes. So what is transformative change? We defined it as fundamental systems-wide shifts in views, structures, and practices, where views are ways of seeing, thinking, and knowing, structures are ways of organizing, governing, and regulating, and practices are ways of doing, behaving, and relating. But transformative change in and of itself isn't necessarily a good thing. Just look at the situation here in the US. So we want a specific kind of transformative change. So deliberate transformative change for a just and sustainable world shifts views, structures, and practices in ways that address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and nature's decline. So lots of argument and debate and interesting conversations about what are those underlying causes and how should we articulate them in the report. What we settled on, not perfect, but a great starting point, are these three major underlying causes: disconnection from and domination over nature and people, concentration of power and wealth, and prioritization of short-term material and individual gains. And these underlying causes are deeply rooted, interconnected social and cultural patterns that have historically co-evolved, and they reinforce one another, and they influence all the direct and indirect drivers of nature's decline. And importantly, they've emerged in the context of intersecting processes of modernism and colonialism and industrial capitalism that, as Charles Eisenstein reminded us this morning, were literally designed to sever relations between mind, body, and land. And so jumping ahead to chapter 5, which again, Bruce Goldstein helped me work on here, we identified 5 high-level strategies to address these underlying causes. Again, lots of literature reviewed, lots of debates, lots of sorting through possible ways of presenting this. But what we came up with for, first of all, strategy 1 is about conserving and regenerating places of value to nature and people. And the main point here, it seems like a kind of a simple strategy, but the main point here is that we don't need transformative change everywhere. There are some places where things are actually going pretty well, and they're disproportionately managed by Indigenous peoples, as it turns out. So this strategy is about strengthening human rights and nature's rights in those places. The other strategies have to do with driving systemic change in the sectors most responsible for biodiversity loss and nature's decline, transforming economic systems for nature and equity, transforming governance systems to be integrated, inclusive, accountable, and adaptive, and shifting societal views and values to recognize and prioritize fundamental interconnections between humans and nature. And that's the strategy that I led with 2 other co-leaders and with Bruce as well. So what was neat is I had the opportunity to recruit 25 of my favorite scholars who were doing the most interesting work in this space to help with the sort of the expert analysis of the literature. And so what we came up with, or what I should say, is that a big part of strategy 5 is it's about moving from relations of domination, characterized as anthropocentric formations based on forms of control and accumulation, to relations of care, characterized as ecocentric and pluriversal formations based on autonomy and reciprocity. And a key message is that we can learn a lot about what relations of care look like by looking at existing and long-standing Indigenous and relational philosophies and ways of being. So for example, and so my colleagues came up with this incredible database of Indigenous and relational philosophies that kind of get at what we're trying to say here about relations of care. For example, Ubuntu from Africa, which is a value system that focuses on reciprocity, dialogue, and collective humanity, or Summa Kamanya from South America, which means living well together with harmonious relationships of all forms of life in the totality of Mother Earth as a living being, or Whakapapa from New Zealand, which refers to cultural connectedness that encompasses both ancestry and nature and determines our relationships and obligations. And we can braid together wisdom, and this Indigenous wisdom with Western thought, as Robin Wall Kimmerer has suggested in Braiding Sweetgrass. We can braid these types of knowledge together, beginning with the realization that they're equal but differentiated. And then, so what do we actually need to do to accomplish this strategy? We came up with 5 actions, and each of these actions has a nice literature review associated with it for further reading. But they have to do with increasing nature connectedness and recognition of human-nature interdependencies in complex webs of life, shifting culture through new narratives, changing social norms regarding production and consumption, facilitating transformative learning processes and spaces that foster nature-inclusive thinking and acting, and co-creating knowledge and weaving diverse knowledge systems. And since I don't have much time, I'll just highlight 3 novel aspects of these actions that we came up with. So with just one, highlighting the material in here on nature connectedness and some strategies for increasing nature connectedness. The idea is that we need more than just access to green space. We have to foster transformative learning spaces, these safe transdisciplinary spaces for exploring links between science and spirituality and experimenting with kind of edgy ideas to cultivate the relational and imaginative capacities and consciousness that's needed for social ecological transformation. And so this is work that Bruce Goldstein's done a lot with on how do you create these learning spaces. They're not just like getting people out in nature, but giving them meaningful ways to connect with nature and themselves. And then a second set of interesting ideas has to do with the need for new narratives and eco-social imaginaries. As we know, if you want to change the way people think, you should change the way they talk. So these narratives shape how humans understand their relationship with nature and one another. So we call for pluriversal and relational narratives as alternatives. And so highlight different ways to promote these different narratives through festivals like the one that Pal Dobrin's going to talk about next, or films, theater, journalism, like the journalism that our NOVA fellows are doing, art science collaborations, education. They can reattune us emotionally and spiritually. So we need to leverage storytelling to shift these cultural narratives and develop compelling case studies of indigenous and relational approaches to transformative change in different contexts. We've heard a lot in this conference, for a lot of examples of new narratives. And then finally, the third one I'll just say is that I'm inspired about the work about tapping into diverse knowledge systems. And we know that disconnection is reinforced by these knowledge systems that privilege control and abstraction in Western. If you want to co-create knowledge across diverse conditions, and some of the most exciting content in this action, it has to do with looking at intuitive interspecies communication to challenge that human-nature divide and open space for more than human intelligences to participate in decision-making. A colleague, Lynn Shannon, who's a marine biologist in South Africa, is starting to use intuitive interspecies communication in her work on habitat conservation with dugongs, for example. So finally, just say that we need to continue. NOVA's doing a great job of promoting this, but we need to continue advancing this flip that we need to have in the dominant paradigm, expanding scientific inquiry to include subjective, intuitive, and transpersonal ways of knowing as essential to understanding transformation. So just want to sum up by saying thank you to you all, to Susan, and especially to NOVA Institute for supporting my ongoing explorations and investigations into this topic. And I want nothing more than just to be of service in this effort that we're outlining here in this second session this afternoon. So thanks again.
Thank you, Hannah. We're really looking forward to working with you at NOVA and all of the other connections and opportunities that this brings. There are so many overlapping communities, as you've all heard, in this space, and it's going to be really exciting as we develop more connectivity between them. And that is what our next speaker, Paul Dobrin, is doing, and he's also working towards this and working with many others here. He's working towards how we can create opportunities to connect academic efforts in system science to ancestral knowledge, to spirituality and regenerative practices in the community. So we're really pleased to have you with us. Thanks, Paul.
Yes, thank you very much. So I will be talking about the Transformations Festival. And this is a concept that came out of a research project I did together with my colleague Therese Asplund. It was a research project on inner transformation for climate and sustainability. And in this process, we came to some conclusions about the need for emerging worldviews. So my main interest is in the intersection of direct experience of wholeness or unity and the evolution of worldviews that correspond to changes in perception of self and the nature of reality. And after teaching meditation for many years, I've observed something remarkable, that direct experiences of interconnection are becoming more and more accessible, but that we lack the worldviews to accompany and impulse the rise in consciousness. So today I want to share what we are building in response. 20 years ago, guiding someone to a direct experience of non-dual awareness or awareness of being might have taken years of practice. Today, I see participants accessing these states with astonishing ease, even people with no prior spiritual practice. The ground of being is doubtlessly way more accessible today than it was only 10 years ago. But the challenge is that when spiritual practice challenges materialistic worldviews through direct experience, practice may face a conceptual vacuum after that. In our 4-year research project with 45 participants, this was one of the major conclusions, that it was quite easy to give people a taste and an experience of connection or going beyond the sense of separation. But habitually, we are defaulting back to our habitual way of interpreting reality or interpreting our perceptions. So this research project brought participants through a 10-week process that included 2 retreats, one longer and one shorter one. And my conclusion was that worldview shift is equally as important as direct experience. Without integration support, profound experiences either get dismissed as neurochemical reactions or lead to spiritual bypassing, or may create paralyzing cognitive dissonance. And the crisis that we face with climate breakdown, social fragmentation, and despair, all these stem from behaviors generated by separation consciousness. The question that became more clear for me is that if experiences of interconnection are becoming more accessible, what worldviews or frameworks can help us integrate those experiences into wisdom and lasting behavioral change? We have profound wisdom traditions with very sophisticated maps of consciousness, but simply importing these frameworks misses something critical. And contemporary practitioners have to navigate scientific materialism, digital technology, climate crises, and frameworks that speaks to those realities are needed. That is to say that we translate the timeless insights and understandings into a contemporary language. But here's the key distinction. We need those 2 things to work together. First, the methodologies for the inward journey, as we heard some beautiful descriptions in the first session, for example, and then the effective ways for exploring consciousness itself. And the second part is the conceptual frameworks for the integration, culturally and time-relevant languages and concepts that helps us understand and communicate the wholeness-based views and the nature of self and reality. So in this process, we developed refined what we call the awareness model. It's a stage-by-stage process or mapping of how insight and change in perception of reality might unfold. It consists of 9 images. Here's the one of the first ones. And the model is emerged out of this research project on inner transformation and climate and sustainability, and somehow spoke to the need for participants of having some sort of a conceptualization of the journey that they were on. So moving on to the worldview aspect, because that was what really started grabbing my interest. How do we develop these culturally suitable and efficient worldviews that can help impulse this shift or this rise in consciousness? New concepts and frameworks emerge through dialogue between diverse knowledge systems. And this understanding led us to envision a living worldview laboratory, bringing together 4 communities. The transformation scientists, the ones of you that are present here today, leading researchers in the fields of system change, consciousness, and sustainability, etc. But to mix that with applied spirituality practitioners, that is, the masters of different traditions, different ways of conducting the inward journey who guide us to direct experience. And also the indigenous wisdom keepers, be it representatives of the Amazonian tribes, African wisdom keepers, Sami, the people in the north of Sweden, representatives, or any of the other wisdom traditions in our world that have existing and very interesting relational understandings and systems of relating. But to mix this also with what we call regenerative innovators, the people who are going at the forefront of finding new ways of doing finance, farming, medicine, that really take this regenerative approach. And the vision was that through their sustained dialogue and shared process over a few days in the format of a laboratory that mixes spiritual practice, dialogue, ceremony, new concept can emerge by marrying these different and contemporary worldviews that bridge the inward journey and outward transformation, hopefully will unfold. So at the heart of this shift, this paradigm shift, or this worldview shift, we could say that a redefinition of abundance is central, because abundance is what we wish for in many cases, but we've been culturally, or we've been fooled into believing that the happiness is in the materialistic part. So let's bring back the relational aspects of it. So a living laboratory for worldview exploration. We want to create a prototype that demonstrates what infrastructure for consciousness transformation looks like. And who knows, maybe developing the methodologies for this whole process. And perhaps the most valuable outcomes will be the methodologies we develop together for worldview exploration and bringing about direct experiences of our shared being. These need to be documented and shared. And Susan, I like the idea of a special issue in Challenges Journal for this work, something to definitely explore further. Yes, the wheel is thinning, consciousness is rising, so let's move forward, creating spaces where we collectively deepen into wholeness while developing the language that bridges our wisdom traditions. As Ramdas said, we're all just walking each other home. I'm grateful for your perspectives on that.
Thank you so much, Paul. This vision is so very much aligned with the Nova Centre for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing. And I think we're really looking forward to hearing how these concepts of bridging really evolves and how we can collaborate to support this, special issues, other ideas, festivals, yes. And I think that Bridging Worlds certainly brings us beautifully to our next speaker, David Manuel-Navarrete, who combines his academic work on social, ecological and technological systems transformation at Arizona State University with investigating the role of ceremonial practices, traditional and modernized, in building holistic well-being, reciprocity, and that deep sense of relationality with life that so many of the other speakers have been talking about. Welcome, David. It's really wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you very much. And it's such an honor and pleasure to share with so many beautiful souls here. I think it's clear to all of us that there is an inner-outer gap in sustainability designs and broader in society, and different people express it in different ways, between materialism and spirituality, between relationality and separateness and all that. But in sustainability designs, people are starting to realize that, and also that we cannot address our current crisis unless we start closing this gap. And academics like to answer questions that start with why, right, and explain things. But I think in this presentation and in my past work, I have actually focused on how do we create solutions where the inner and the outer modes of perception and being become synergistic, right? So I will present two different examples of partnerships between universities, practitioners, and local communities in order to answer this question of the how. First, the spiritslab.org, and then Earth Stewardship Hubs in the Amazon. The Spirits Lab is based at Arizona State University, includes people from North America, Asia, and other people. Both, it's a partnership between academics and practitioners of rituals and spiritual practices. The acronym is Spirituality, Rituals, and Sustainability, Spirits. And in this lab, we ask this question of how can spiritual rituals and ceremonies facilitate inner-outer sustainable transformations, and it can happen by fostering emotional interconnection with nature, community, and the sacred, by activating collective agency, by healing our relationships, inspiring sustainability actions, and resilience, right? I'll give you just one example of a study that we did about ayahuasca ceremonies in the Amazon, partnering with Takehuasi Center in Peru. We surveyed 68 retreat participants from Western educated backgrounds, and they participate in indigenous-led therapeutic ceremonies that use ayahuasca. And the focus of the study was on does the participation in these ceremonies and rituals change the relationality as the way they experience relationality. And what we found is that there were very interesting inner shifts. There was increasing reciprocity with non-humans, and turn into a relational ontology. Ontology means the way in which the things that you consider real in the world. So these are really deep leverage points that can lead to big transformations. There were also outer changes in consumption patterns, changes in lifestyle, and a more interest or inclination towards community living. Many of the participants thought about moving from an urban area to a rural area after the ceremony. And we found that the post-ceremony integration is really key. It's not only the setting, and the context, which are of the ceremony itself that are important, but the post-ceremony integration. So the implications is that there is lots of evidence that spirituality drives nature connectedness, lots of studies. But what we are trying to show here is that it also can drive pro-sustainability change. And there is an opportunity for co-designing, sustainability designs and practitioners co-designing the ceremonies in an intentional way. So in order to promote this post-ceremony integration. Okay, so the next example is the Earth Stewardship Hubs that we are piloting in Ecuador. And the mission of these hubs, which is a partnership between indigenous communities and universities, is to create a world where both education and technological innovation are at the service of reconnecting people to life. And we started in 2018 and working with Quechua and Guarani communities and our boundary organization. It's called Yarina. It's a Quechua language school. And the idea was to scale this model of teaching Quechua language to foreigners to the Guarani lands, which are communities very remote, deep in the Amazon forest. And the first years were about building relationships. This is super important. You have to really invest into the building of strong relationships before doing it. It's not important what you do at the beginning. It's important that you do it together and you fail together and you know each other through the doing and the failing. But over time, we were able to build infrastructure, these cabins in the middle of the forest, and the logistics are super complicated. But as I said, it's the experience of building together that generates the partnership. And then we have been able to bring study abroad students and researchers, anthropologists, biologists, deep into the forest to be immersed in these Guarani and Quechua cultures, the rituals, and the ways of knowing. As an spin-off of these exchanges and partnerships, there was this Solar Canoes Against Deforestation initiative or project. You can check it on the webpage. And the mission is to electrify river transportation in the Amazon. And we have done that. We have created this prototype of an electric motor that is retrofitting the gas motor that they use. This is very important because it's relatively easy to bring just like a motor from Europe, and when something fails, there is no way to repair it. But here, by retrofitting what already exists, even though it requires a lot of investment in terms of technological development, it allows people to actually have something that they know how to use, they know how to repair, etc., and that is adapted to the place. And solar canoes have some advantages and some disadvantages in comparison to gas power canoes. They have lower operation cost. They have higher. They require though a higher investment, and they are quieter and reduce pollution. But so far, with the technology that we have, they are only able to go through short distance travel, right? So it's work in progress. But I think what is important is that in order to be successful into creating this co-producing this new technology that is added to the ground there, the inner dimension, and to be open to both worldviews, to have a horizontal form of partnership and collaboration where both knowledges are not only equally valuable or valuable for different things, but to equally value it. They are also equally valid in the context of their own knowledge system. So I think I'll leave it here with this image.
Well, thank you so much, David. And it's really so wonderful that more academics are willing to weave all the scientific inquiry with these other ways of knowing and combine the strengths of different cultural approaches to this social and ecological well-being. And there's so much more to learn and so much potential in that space. So thank you again. And now I'm delighted to welcome our next speaker, Ioan Fazey from the University of York. You've already heard him mentioned, who will continue this thread of the conversation. He also weaves together diverse worlds, system science, ancient wisdom, and shamanic traditions as a path to regenerative change and social transformation. And Ioan is also a co-founder of the Transformations community, and we're really looking forward to exploring collaborations together. Thank you, Ioan.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. It's wonderful to be here. It's been fantastic to listen to all the very synergic different talks that are super complementary. So really, really excited to be here. So thank you. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about just some weaving system science and other aspects, other wider ways of knowing. Just to start, we all know we're in a transformation. Big smiley face there. Is that good? Well, we know it's fairly inevitable. Something is changing, and that's inevitable. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy to get there, but at least things are shifting. And as Paul highlighted, it's becoming easier and almost more open now for sort of things that we can engage with. So really fantastic to see that emerging. Over the last 10, 15 years, there's been lots of research work in lots of different arenas. Some of them are on the science of systems transformation, how we facilitate that. That's grown exponentially. More work emerging around things like regenerative futures, the sort of futures that we're trying to get to, very different underlying set of systems dynamics. But increasingly, it's becoming much clearer, as many other speakers today have said, that the separation challenge that we've got, this human nature separation and many other forms of separation, is a really key underpinning challenge that we've got. If we can't address that, we're not going to get the desirable transformations we want to see, the smiley faces, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get to more regenerative futures. So really that ecocentric consciousness, our sense that we are everything, we are part of nature, we are nature, rather than even being part of it or even connected to it, is really fundamental to moving in the sort of directions that we want to move in. And a bit like Paul, again, I see that there are changes. There are so many people now looking for something that will help them make that shift. And I see it as a shift really from a self-individual mind as computer thinking, separate from nature paradigm and way of walking in the world, to an all is one. We are nature, an embodied mind, a way of being, different way of walking in the world. And there are some people in both different camps of these two different forms of consciousness. There are more and more people that are ready for a shift. They're looking for a shift. They're looking for something different. They want something more relational, and they're starting to realize that they can't go on as they currently are in the situation that we find ourselves in. And there are many different ways for engaging that. There are many different entry points into it. There's lots of people and places to learn from, indigenous cultures and so on. And there's not necessarily one route into that. What I've found is that the contemporary shamanic practice work, this sort of essence of being able to open up to experiencing the aliveness of all things, that everything is alive around us, this quantum world, however you want to explain it, is particularly important. The shamanic practice is directly engaging us with that reconnective power of nature and can teach us quite quickly and to go quite deeply into shifting our level of consciousness and giving those experiences that Paul talked about. I won't go into too much details about what it is, but I think the best way of explaining it, it's something like a mother's love. When you get that beautiful love from your mother, it helps you enlarge your range of imagination through which yourself can move in. To me, it's not really an inner thing, it's actually going outer so that you can relate more widely to what's around you rather than necessarily what's in you. And of course, that is transformative as well. That's transformative because it allows you to address so many of the things that we've been talking about, so many of the pain that we have, so much of the trauma that we have as well. But one of the useful things about shamanic practice is it's also very agential. It allows you to engage in the world directly. It gives you so many different ways in which you can open up to this sense that we are all. So for me, it's an interesting process of, is it actually about inner and is it more about going outer? It's quite an interesting thing to play with. I think with my work that I'm moving towards now is that I see this as three key questions. The first is, how can we help ourselves and others step towards an ecocentric consciousness? Again, exactly what many of you are talking about, but how do we actually help those who are somehow ready to do that and to move into that sort of wider way of opening up to the world around us, relating very differently to the world? The second question then comes from really asking us, how can we learn to operate collectively through this ecocentric consciousness? There are many indigenous groups, practices, and cultures that naturally do that. Their whole culture is oriented around that. And that's very different from training individuals to open up themselves. And particularly in the West, we have such a chronic separation paradigm. We live in that. It's so chronic that it's very, very difficult to be able to find ways of coming together to make that happen. But imagine what if it was possible to bring in different government organizations that might want to try and address a challenge like pollution in a river. We have many of those challenges in the UK. But what would it actually look like to bring those through a process of developing a greater ecocentric consciousness and work together to change the very decision-making models, the way the governance models operate and so on. And I think that's a challenge that we've got, particularly in the West, of being able to move and shift towards transformation in that way. And then I think another question, a third question, taking that even wider, is how can we find and use system science to help us cohere and align organizations such that we get them working together, those that are supporting ecocentric ways of operating, collectively working and so on. But how can we do that in a really smart way that we can maximize the societal transformation effect? You know, that's a really key, interesting question. How do we develop that alliance so that we can actively, directly start working in those ways, using all the sorts of things that everybody's been talking about in this conference? So I see this as a system science and ancient wisdom and bringing it together. And in system science, there are many different aspects of that. But one of the aspects is, how do you nurture and protect the pockets of the future in the present? Those green things on that diagram, they're going to be the butterfly. They might be examples of the butterfly with the worldviews, the values, the ways of being that we can see now in the present that may well become that new future. And then the second question often is, well, and how do you create a transitionary system that breaks up, disrupts, creates the space for those pockets to then grow, emerge, and become and diffuse into and become the new norm? So those are the sort of system change questions that come out of that. And then in consciousness terms, it's really asking a question, though, what would it actually look like to try and do this from an ecocentric consciousness way of being? We can't do system change using old thinking around systems change. We've got to use new modes of ways of being, new forms of consciousness in order to support some kind of systemic change. And I'm sure that that would look very, very different to what current systems change thinkers are how they're operating. So I think that's really about marrying those two things and finding new ways. It needs a new approach to systems change in order to get the system change that we might need. And I think, there are many people would say this is idealistic and challenging, but others have also commented, I think Charles at the beginning, that, when you engage with this openness and you address the separation, it's like coming home. And I love this quote from Alan Watts. He said, we didn't come into this world, we came out of it like a wave from the ocean, and we're not strangers here. Many of those who I teach on the training programs that I run comment on how it feels like coming home. So I think the shift is happening, it's moving, it's heading in that right direction. So how do we find ways of helping to facilitate that and really bring it into being? Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Ioan. This is really inspiring and very exciting to see this blurring of boundaries that we've created between worlds. And we really need to understand this more clearly as we consider broader perspectives. And I think we actually really need to redefine the parameters of academic funding to allow fusion of some of these more creative approaches that see unity of consciousness as a foundation for regeneration and new ways of being. And that certainly brings us to our next speaker, who works in the world of philanthropy. And it's often through philanthropy that more compassionate, loving, creative endeavours can be supported and that worldviews can be shifted. And I am just so delighted to welcome Mohammed from the Fazey Institute, which is all about building the spiritual foundation for a loving world. And I invite you to reflect on the beautiful quote that we put at the end of his bio that talks about love as the source of everything and the ultimate destination of humanity. And I won't read it all, but it really highlights that, especially as our world needs more love more than anything at the moment. This is just inspiring to hear this sort of emphasis from philanthropic organisations. So we're delighted to have you with us. Welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I think when we talk about transformation, we are confronted with the puzzle of the human story, or the story of stories. There are different models of human development, from the cosmic, which maps human development from the Big Bang to the Big Freeze. We have the biological story, which is the constitution of a superorganism called humanity. Or we have other spiritual stories as well, although they are different. About the purpose and the creation and the process and the end, even the end of the world. There are different stories. The most predominant story right now is the story of the mind, basically, that maps human development from some sort of naive start, or literal naive start, to a stage of analytical and rational stage, which predominates our culture now. Probably there are also many who have, like Ken Wilber, Bob Bella, and many others, and also Teilhard de Chardin, who articulated that this journey is a journey towards love. And in my organization, the Fazey Institute, we have a big project called the Shared Sacred Story. Actually, we published the book, and I encourage you all to pick up your copies on Amazon, which has the stories of 9 different traditions, as well as a common story of humanity that includes the scientific worldview, as well as the these spiritual worldviews, without necessarily trying to create a sort of fusion with respecting the distinctness, but also creating one human story. And I'll put it in the chat for you. You can get your copy and be enjoy it. Yuval Harari, the historian, talked about the evolutionary magic of being human is our ability to generate shared meaning and cooperate. Imagine if this cooperation is based on love. Right now, many of you have spoken about separation, being individual. That is the sort of the central model right now, operating in our culture. The economic Homo economicus, going for our interests and for our own, seeing ourselves as individuals, not necessarily individuals in relation. Actually, one of the long-term goals of the organization I work for is to move humanity to help we're not the center of the universe, to help move humanity from an egocentric way of knowing that is based on separation toward a new way of being that is based on love and wholeness of reality. So this is a journey that I hear echoed in many of your presentations, and I believe we are at a moment in human history where we're envisioning something different, something not even just about humanity itself, but the family of life that includes the natural world, our relationship with others, the way we see our relationship with other human beings, other societies, other cultures, and also our restoring our relationship with a sort of the divine that we have lost through this journey of rationality, if you will. So that's basically what my organization is trying to do. And broadly speaking, the role of philanthropy is it is about love. I think I spoke about it at many different panels and occasions. It is about love, but that doesn't mean I'm not being too simplistic to say that all philanthropy is about love. People do philanthropy for different reasons, but we can look at it from in a perspective of intentions. Intentions could be, people could have different intentions for doing philanthropy, but also the impact itself and the process itself. And I think if the outcome leads to the sort of a loving world, that's what we want from philanthropy. That moves us from I think, therefore I am worldview, the seed of a worldview, to amo ergo sum, which is I love, therefore I am. So that's the sort of journey that I believe philanthropy can play a role in toward an omega point of shared flourishing. These days we hear a lot about human flourishing, but I think we should go beyond human flourishing, the flourishing of all. We cannot separate yourself as a human family from the rest of reality. This flourishing should be sort of a shared flourishing of all of human life. And you know that when you ask an 85-year-old person, you've heard such stories. What is the most important thing in life? They would say family, friends, or love, or children. Children know that intuitively. You can't offer a child $1 million and make him happy. Children love and thrive in love. But the previous speaker talked about the love of a mother. Love children and older adults understand the importance of love. The rest of us forget. We get swallowed up in our careers and our interests and our role in the economy. But that doesn't mean it disappears. It gets suppressed. We prioritize other things. In the Islamic tradition, Islamic theology, actually the name for humans is Nas. Nas also means forgetful. We do forget. And that's probably why we build civilizations and machines and so forth, because we want to remember and be remembered. So we have such weakness as human beings. We suppress. But the fact is, the most important thing in our world is love, and we can build a beautiful world with love. Going back to that idea of amo ergo sum, I love, therefore I am, and I think philanthropy can play that role. And in more practical terms, philanthropy can invest in risks. Because of the resources available and the longer time horizon that is not restricted to short-term returns for stakeholders. And philanthropy can also bridge between those who are trying to make change from the margins, from outside, and the mainstream economy, because philanthropy is connected integrally to both worlds. So I have high hopes that philanthropy can play this role in changing the narratives that you're talking about and helping build a spiritually grounded, loving world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I love, therefore I am. That's just so beautiful. And it's important that we normalize talking about love, which is or what everything thrives on, especially what we yearn for. And I think the growing separation in our societies includes, as you said, the separation from the physical, from the spiritual, and that hunger for connection, whether we realize it or not, it is a form of spiritual yearning, as I know that you've said in your writings. And perhaps that's why we see in the Global Flourishing Study, which I know that you've contributed to, that people flourish more when that yearning is answered. And we hope that the work of FETSA can encourage this priority in the wider philanthropic community and and actually influence other funding streams as well, because that's certainly what the world needs now. Thank you again, Mohammed. And that brings us perfectly to our final panelists, because more coordinated efforts are really needed to connect communities and groups working in this space. As we've already heard, this could have a really powerful effect. And Gretchen Steidle, founder and president of Circles for Conscious Change, is working with the Garrison Institute to map spiritually grounded organisations for social change. Knowing who is doing what is a vital prelude to building opportunity, collaboration, and cohesive efforts to influence global narratives. And I think Gretchen was joining us late, but I'm hoping that she's here.
I'm here.
Great. Wonderful. Welcome, Gretchen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am founder of Circles for Conscious Change, but I also direct the Spirituality and Social Change program at the Garrison Institute. And we are working on a collaborative generative field building initiative called the Conscious Change Collective. I want to tell you about it briefly, but then I'm actually going to demo it for you and share a little bit of the field wisdom that's emerging from this community that is really very much reflecting much of what I'm hearing today as well, and what potential exists in this generative field itself. So we started by focusing on organizations that consider contemplative practice, inner work, or spirituality as core to their values or theory of change, and those that were actually integrating those practices into the ways that they were delivering their program model for systems change, such that we could study this intersection and have a deeper understanding of how the inner dimensions are actually influencing the social transformation. This is a project that's only been a year in the works. So far, formally, we've had a chance to explore more than 700 organizations around the globe. We have almost 400 that are currently included within the map, with more than 100 others that have been invited to apply in, and it remains open for organizations to connect with us, to refer others, and as well to reach out to us around collaboration. So let me give you an actual tour of what it looks like. So we have this space, the Conscious Change Collective, that provides tutorials and other framings, but through this, you can get to the map, which is a Kumu-based map. Here are the 400 organizations that are in the process of completing extensive profiles that our community of field co-creators developed out of a shared desire of what it is we actually want to know about each other. So with each organization, there's an extensive profile about their mission and their programs, their impact, how they measure it, why they do what they do, and how they understand the inner work to influence the outer change. All of this flows into, in aggregate, a massive data bank of these case studies that we're now able to do research on, to look more closely at what are best practices, what are common values and common language, what is emerging as this alternative paradigm that so many of you are already talking about. Here are an extraordinary number of case studies of what does this look like in practice. We have about 80% of our community are actually NGOs, but we also have academic institution, capacity building organizations, movement builders, and funders in this network as well. And you can hear have a chance to kind of search by type of organization, by the different kinds of communities that they might serve. Let's say you at this time want to look at who's working with youth and families around the world, or those that are working just with folks that are incarcerated. You have this opportunity to look at the networks by population, by the social issues that they are working on, anything and everything, for example, involving climate, and so on. And the only reason why all 400 aren't mapped in all of these spaces is just that we're working with organizations for them to help finish all of their profiles, in which case they will be able to be searched in this way. We also have the chance to look at the actual modality of practice that organizations are using towards social change, so that if you were curious about all of the organizations using mindfulness and meditation, or organizations using nature-based practices, or yoga and movement, you have a chance to see what are all of the different applications of yoga across the world for social impact. We also have the ability to look by geography. We have a few different ways of seeing this, of seeing this work and doing analyses about. Here is a geographical map of where we're located at this time. We have, unfortunately, I mean, we've started primarily within the United States because of a sense of urgency around the climate that organizations are addressing right now. But we are eager to build out the connections and the organizations working on a global scale, which is our next phase of work. And the other thing we have a chance to track over time are the relationships between these organizations. And so if we toggle just these relationships, we can see how any one organization is sort of connecting to others, and what level of reciprocity are in these relationships. And are these, for example, relationships where there are collaborations and learning, or are these funding relationships, and who are the funders that are most active within these networks, so that we can more sustainably resource this field. So overall, there's a lot to discover here, and all of this flows into a database that we are eager to make available for any research purposes that organizations are wanting to work on that can support your work. You can just reach out to us through the Conscious Change Collective website. And I want to give you one final just little example of the kinds of things that are coming that we have a chance to learn from this map. We just took a slice, for example, of the map of organizations that are taking a contemplative approach to criminal justice reform. Most recently, we had about 30 organizations working in different domains around this particular social issue area. And by learning from all of their insights and practices, we have a chance to build a concept map of the ways in which the inner work is actually being applied, how that shifts systems and the underlying roots of social issues, and the kinds of impacts and outcomes that are coming from that work. And we are now doing this across climate change, education, mental health, and looking at areas of poverty and alternative economic systems, as well as democracy and belonging. And so we have a number of different lenses that we can apply to be able to be learning from each other. And we think there's extraordinary potential of this generative field. Already there's so many other initiatives that have been spoken about today that are network-based and our movement and communities that we hope we can connect with, so that we can be supporting each other to amplify the visibility of this ancient and new paradigm shift that we need, and to amplify the impact that we can have together. And so I invite you to join us to think about what we can do together that we cannot do alone. And we will be convening this movement for the first time at the end of March at the Garrison Institute in Garrison, New York. And we welcome you to join us in person so that we can be with each other share wisdom, and think about collective action.
Thank you for rounding out the session so beautifully, Gretchen. It's really encouraging to see so many groups in this space, and I'm sure there are many people here who might like to add to that. So thank you again, and thanks to all of our panelists. Now we have another opportunity for discussion. So again, I invite you to put your cameras on to promote that sense of community. And we welcome questions or comments on any perspective that you've heard or any issues that were raised even in the earlier session. So please put up your hands if you would like to ask a question, make a comment. But I do see wonderful friend to Nova, Blake Poland. Yes, he's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Susan, for all of this and all of the speakers. What a top-notch set of thinkers and activists in this space. And it's just the note, I mean, there's so many things that stood out to me, but the note that I made was provocative and enlivening field notes from the emergent shift. Not always new, but renewed. And so many lovely links to new work I wasn't aware of to pursue. And just a couple of things that really stood out to me, the notion that transformation is given and not always desirable, but not something we need to make happen so much as I love Bruce's phrase, practicing transition inside the rupture. That really spoke to me. And what David said about shifting from why to how. There's just so many inspiring pieces of work here that really, it's such an uplifting day. And it's so easy to get lost in the doom scrolling about collapse that today was really a breath of fresh air for me. And I love that all this work is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. And I would certainly love to hear from our panelists if there are any thoughts that have been inspired by listening to others, particularly on how we can connect our efforts better. And we've already had some suggestions, but especially in this world where funding metrics are not necessarily conducive, we're trying to move into a new world where we're trying to support these sort of initiatives is more challenging. So I'd welcome any thoughts from any of our panelists or anybody else here on how we might influence that narrative. Mohammed.
Yeah, just briefly, I hear from what I heard, there's a lot of convergence around the diagnosis of the problem. People articulated it differently, but the sort of meta crisis, worldview crisis that we see in the world, that delivered the world we are now, and then the need for a new story, for a new worldview. So I see these as convergences, potentially as areas for future collaboration as well.
Susan, I can come. Yeah, I was just really taken by Paul's point about the veil is lifting, and that was my sense, but I've not heard anybody else say it. That was what I've been picking up, and I think that's really encouraging, and I think it's happening really fast. I think it's moving really, really fast. So I take a lot of inspiration and hope from that. Actually, I think it's really encouraging. So thank you.
I agree. And I think having conversations, even like we're having now, it's hard to imagine this even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, the sorts of things. And people are meeting in this space a lot more easily too. And I think that creates the permission, I think, to have these conversations. Paul.
Yes, beautiful. I was amazed by the frequency of love being brought up. I didn't expect it in this. I thought it was going to be more mind than love. So I'm positively surprised, and I feel a sense of hope from that. And I like to add the quote from, I think it's Nisargadatta Maharaj. In wisdom, I am nothing. In love, I am everything. Between the two, my life moves.
Thank you. Thank you. And you don't need tenure to talk about love. That was another conclusion we had from the last Nova conference. Karen.
It really struck me just how much alignment there was between all the talks. And so it was very motivating and inspiring. And when you talk about, I think we have a tendency to think, oh, how can we collaborate, network, and, work all together and everything. But I don't know I think that these types of forums are really helpful just so that we know what's out there and we know that these fractals of change are everywhere and that there is this larger change going on, but that we don't need to be controlling it all and in there. So I feel that, this serves a really important role in just saying that lowering our shoulders so that we know, yeah, the change is happening. So thank you very much for organizing this.
Absolutely. I think we contribute to the consensus reality that the collective consciousness just by doing what we're doing, and that can sort of invoke that in others without having to work hard. Rufus.
Yeah, maybe I need to bring a bit of diversity. I mean, so overall, so it's very, one of the reasons first I would say we tend to want to emphasize, at least here at Life Itself, the positive dimension, because there's in the experience of people we're often engaging with, the first place you go when you confront the actual situation that we're in is despair, and resignation or suppression. So I think it's kind of very positive, and one of the things I guess that gets me going, and I should say it was the Beatles, all you need is love. That's just not true. Unfortunately, it's just not it's so to kind of say something here is one, the situation we're facing is a collective action problem, right, in a load of these areas. And we have never, as a species, addressed successfully a collective action problem of the scale that we have today. Now, I hope we do, but I'm just saying, and almost every culture that has existed in human history has often failed. Now, there are examples, of course, some indigenous cultures, many modern cultures. I mean, in fact, modern cultures have solved collective action problems at scales much larger than indigenous cultures. I know that we are often today very fond of indigenous cultures. They are amazing. But for example, in terms of funding science and all kinds of other things, but just essentially, whether indigenous cultures or modern cultures, we've often really struggled with collective action problems. We've over hunted species. The Maori, when they arrived in New Zealand, basically hunted various things to extinction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we face the mother of all collective action problems. And so point one, this is really tough. It's not just to do with capitalism or communism or modernity. We're just facing a really hard problem in that regard. And the probability that we solve it in the time required before a serious breakdown is quite low, given the evidence before us. If we just look at it honestly. And in almost every previous paradigmatic transition that you can look at in human history that we know of, there has been quite a significant breakdown for it. Whether you're the end of the Roman Empire in the West, which you'd say is the birth of, the pre-modern era, you had major decomplexification in Western Europe, and so on. Trade declined, living standards probably declined from what we can tell, and so on. And then obviously you have the 14th century and so on. So I'm just saying that one thing I guess we have to say is unfortunately often love is not maybe just enough on its own. There's some other things. We talked about worldviews, but how hard this is. I just kind of want to inject into this of I guess a little bit of the darkness that we have to confront at the moment. And I think it's insufficiently often, and finding the spaces. I'm sure many of the people here are very aware. I began living with people back when I was at Cambridge who were working in biodiversity, and just watching, what that they were even seeing in the decade they were doing research from the late 90s to the late 2000s happening to the rainforest they would work in and things like that. Many of you here have probably lived through some of these things. I'm only saying though that there's a kind of realism, and part of that realism is also, and I know that other people from sharing this call are like doing this work, but the realism of what it will take social in terms of social and political organizing and other things to have the change happen at the pace that we have, and to think seriously at this point about what will happen in the case, the unfortunately all too likely case at this moment that it will not happen at all. I have a 1-year-old, I have a 6-year-old. What keeps my wife up at night is the thought that what happens when there's conflict in the world? Children go to war. What is the likelihood that our son will see major conflict in their time? Quite high. So I think at the moment, one of the things that's just like, it's the urgency and a way to really, like, honestly transmit that and what is needed at this point in time. I think the really hopeful thing that is very evident on this call, and I see in the world in general, is that there is a shift, at least what I would call to a postmodern paradigm. One of the things that I think, by the way, is interesting, and I don't know, we're not going to have time in this call, is the distinction, I would say, between the postmodern paradigm in which ecology and taking care of the planet and Avatar are kind of like emblematic of that vision, and what I would call a meta-modern paradigm. What would go beyond that? The reintegration of reason and so on and so forth beyond that. I mean, this is another kind of bigger question for this evening. But I just want to say is that I think that this is because one of the risks, I just want to say on the other end, is that we're going to have a swing back to the mystical. We will jettison the good things that came with modernity as we rush back to that which it derided. But yeah, I know that's a little long, but I think one of the things that is at the moment is that this some degree of being able to hold the darkness that we see coming, and can we find a way through it to the light, or can we build, as it were, beacons that last through the winter to the coming spring?
Thank you, Rufus. And it's important that we be grounded, absolutely. And I do love what Blake said about diamonds are forged under intense pressure, perhaps the conscious evolution also, and that for all of these difficulties, without love, it's going to be a whole lot harder. So thank you so much. Hannah.
Thank you so much for this fascinating conversation and so many good nuggets of information over the last 4 or 5 hours. But I guess I'll just highlight one that really stuck with me. I think it was Bianca talking about the different types of intelligence this morning. And it just made me realize, how much we prioritize and privilege cognitive intelligence versus, of course, emotional intelligence, but also the concept of spiritual intelligence, I think, is really inspiring and exciting. That's what we need, I think. We need a new paradigm shift, but how are we going to get there? We need to cultivate more spiritual intelligence. We need to create transformative learning experiences. We need to look to different sources of knowledge to cultivate that intelligence. And so not just book knowledge or the next peer-reviewed report or saying, well, we can't put that in the assessment because it hasn't been published in a peer-reviewed journal. No, we need to start, and we are starting to acknowledge and legitimize other forms of knowledge, like other sorts of intelligence, earth intelligence, plant intelligence, animal intelligence. And I think that is going to be huge as that becomes more allowed into the academy, more allowed into our science and our research. I think that will facilitate more the kind of transformative learning that we really need. And I really appreciate that Nova Institute, Fetzer Institute, and some others are really on the leading edge of helping legitimize that, and making love not be a dreaded 4-letter word. So thank you so much for bringing us all together.
Thank you, Hannah. We are approaching the end of the time, but I want to keep this conversation going, so we will do so. Denny.
So what I was going to say very much parallels what Rufus was saying. And so I won't repeat any of it, but I think he was really kind of tapping into what my concerns are. I'm a scientist, but I'm steeped in the policy world and immersed in politics, trying to influence the levers of government to create a more nurturing society that is more responsive to the human condition and climactic condition and all of the other planetary concerns that we have, and at the same time I'm trying to reach the public, middle America, not other scientists, not other academics, not other folks that are as enlightened as this group is, but real middle America. And it is frustrating and it's difficult and it's hard to figure out exactly how to do that, how to proliferate the messages that we heard today. But I'll tell you that what my involvement in this group gives me hope and gives me some optimism and a direction and a way forward. And I'm just going to end by asking you to read an essay by Bertrand Russell, who lived from 1872 to 1970, on what I have lived for. 3 passions have governed his life, and I think it describes something we will all relate to. The longing for love, the search for knowledge, and the unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. And it is so dear to me that I have been literally keeping it in my wallet for the last 40 years. And so I'm just going to put it in the chat in case you haven't read it before, but it is really astounding and moving. So
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that, Denny. That's beautiful. And thank you for all of the work that you do, reaching out for change. Bruce.
Yeah, Susan, what a great conversation. What an amazing diversity of voices and the connection between all these ideas. But before we go, I wanted to ask you, Nova Institute, fascinating convening you've done here. I'm not so familiar with your work. Tell us where you're headed next, and what should we keep our eyes out for?
Well, we have a number of wonderful new programs, and we don't have time to tell you all about them. But we have our Scholars and Fellows program. We're bringing all sorts of new and exciting people in to create conversations. We have our media program, which we talked about earlier. All the recordings, by the way, will be available after this, so you can have a look at what you might have missed earlier. And we have 2 new centres. The centre that I mentioned on planetary consciousness and global flourishing, and we really want to continue this conversation and hold more events and discussions about promoting connectivity. And we also have a centre for justice and mental well-being, and we have a number of others that we hope to launch. So I'm not going to take up more time by talking about that, because we probably do have only a few minutes left and a few more things to say before we end the conference. But Brian may want to add to that, because before we wrap up and play our 2-minute theme video at the end, which you might all like to enjoy again, I'd like to invite Brian Berman, President of Nova, to say a few words. Brian.
Well, thank you, Susan, and what an incredibly inspiring day. I mean, just the questions alone, were worth the price of admission, and I hope we can continue these conversations. I think answer that last question. One of the things is we are trying to create a safe and brave space, a place of real trust where people can bring their best selves together, and through the different disciplines come up with different ways to address some of these sticky issues of our times. And I think that this today has been a great example, and I hope you all continue to stay connected with Nova. There's a lot of different ways. We'll put it into the chat, from campfires to the integration hub, collaborative centers, a whole variety of ways. And, no one place has all the answers, as we've been hearing, and lots of people are, I think, like-minded spirits. And I was just blown away by the depth and breadth of the work that I was hearing from so many people. And I was thinking, well, it was only matched by the big hearts of the people involved. And I think, when we look for scholars, we always say, it's people who have got it here and they've been very successful in their careers, but it's really here. And then they want to share and work together in different ways. So the feeling I have right now is what I have when I'm on a sailboat, and it's one of elation. It's one where we cast off the lines, and then we head out of the harbor, and the crew and myself are all working together in harmony, and we're in tune with the winds, with the tides, and sails are perfectly trimmed, and we're never quite sure where we're going, but we know it's the right direction, and that together we're sailing towards that transformations that we all want to see and be. And I think that's what's going on. So I'll turn it over to Susan. I want to thank Susan again for doing such a masterful job as the admiral of this meeting today, and turn it over to her for closing remarks. All.
Thank you, and I'd like to add my enormous thanks to Nova, but also to all of our wonderful speakers, amazing group, and to everyone else here for bringing your energy and enthusiasm and love to this gathering. We've provided a program focused on connection, collaboration, compassion and care as a powerful way not only to heal our personal, social and ecological challenges, but for co-creating a more beautiful future. And we believe that building stronger relationships with other communities, also working towards this, can magnify and accelerate this, as we've already discussed. So we hope to develop the connections that we've made here today more going forward. We also hope that each of you have felt a sense of connection and community. We feel that events like this are so important to nourish ideas and relationship, and we hope that you will come to our ongoing campfire and events and conferences if you can. As Brian mentioned, we also invite you to join the Nova Integration Hub if you're not already a member, and this is an ongoing virtual community where you can engage with discussions, and we hope to see you there. Thanks also to the people behind the scenes at Nova, especially Alan, Rick, Aaron, Trent and Tolu and Lachlan in the studio in Melbourne, who works through the night for us. Today's recordings will be posted in the next week or so on the event page if you missed anything or want to watch again or share with others. So with that, we wish you all very much love and light for the holiday season, and we're going to conclude with that 2-minute opening video to close things out. So big group wave before we go. And we'll go to the video.